Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going on a deep dive into a part of the Bible that I think can be, well, pretty relevant to our lives even today. Deuteronomy chapter 6.
Yeah,
I
Deuteronomy.
know, I know. Old
Uh,
Testament, right.
Definitely old, but that doesn't mean it's irrelevant.
That's what we're here to find out,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, Deuteronomy. For those who maybe haven't cracked it open in a while, what's the deal?
Well, the name itself actually means second law. It's basically a collection of speeches that Moses gave to the Israelites right before they were about to enter the promised land after, 40 years wandering in the desert.
Okay, so like a final pep talk before the big game,
Yeah, you could think of it that way, but with some pretty high stakes, right?
for sure. So what's the main message Moses is trying to drive home in chapter 6?
Well, imagine you've been through all that hardship, all that wandering. You're finally on the verge of entering this land flowing with milk and honey, everything you've been promised.
Sounds like it'd be pretty tempting to just want to kick back and relax.
You would think so, right? But that's exactly where Moses comes in with this crucial reminder like, hey, don't forget who brought you here.
So it's a warning against taking things for granted.
Absolutely. And chapter 6 gets even more specific. It starts with what many call the greatest commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might.
Okay, that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean, to love God with your whole being?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely about more than just following a set of rules.
Right. It's got to be deeper than that.
It is. It's about having this deep personal connection with God, one that influences every aspect of your life.
Okay, so how do you actually do that? How did Moses tell people to cultivate that kind of connection?
He gave some, well, pretty intense advice. He told them to talk about God's commands constantly, at home, on walks, even lying down and getting up.
Wow, so no escaping those deep theological discussions, huh? That's definitely different from how most of us approach things today.
Right. I mean, how many of us scroll through our phones before bed instead of contemplating God's love?
Yeah, guilty as charged. But I see the point. Moses is saying that constantly engaging with your faith, that's key to keeping that connection strong.
It can't just be a Sunday morning thing.
That really makes you think, doesn't it? What does loving God with your whole being look like in our modern, often chaotic lives? How do we even begin to bring faith into our daily routine in a meaningful way?
It's a big question. And I think Deuteronomy 6 gives us some clues. But before we get into that, there's another really important point that Moses raises.
Okay, I'm all ears. What else did he want to emphasize?
Well, he warned the Israelites about the danger of forgetting God once they were settled and comfortable in the promised land.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about remembering God in the midst of hardship, but also when things are going well.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that success and prosperity can actually sometimes lead to complacency. When things are good, it's easy to forget where your blessings come from.
I think that's something we can all relate to, even if our personal promised land looks different from what the Israelites were facing. It's just human nature to sometimes forget to be grateful, to take things for granted when life is good.
It's true, and that's precisely the trap that Moses was warning against. But the good news is, Deuteronomy 6 also offers some practical guidance on how to combat that complacency.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. What kind of guidance did Moses offer? What did he actually suggest people do to stay connected to their faith, even amidst all the distractions and comforts of everyday life?
Well, one of the most fascinating pieces of advice is about passing on faith to the next generation. It's not just about individual piety, it's about creating a culture of remembrance and passing on values that stand the test of time.
Okay, I think that's a great place to pause and pick up next time. Stay tuned, everyone, because we're going to explore how the lessons from this ancient text can help us navigate the challenges and opportunities of modern life.
It's really interesting how much Deuteronomy emphasizes this idea of passing faith on to the next generation.
Yeah, like it's not just about you and your own personal beliefs, right?
Right. It's about creating a whole community, a culture, where people stay connected to their history, their values, all of that.
It's like building a legacy, right? Making sure those core principles are carried forward.
Exactly. And the method Moses lays out is fascinating.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, he doesn't just advocate for like formal religious instruction.
So less about lectures, more about actually living it.
Exactly. He tells them to discuss these things constantly, sitting at home, walking down the road, even lying down at night and getting up in the morning.
Wow, that's pretty immersive. Can you imagine those long desert walks just turning to deep theological debates?
I mean, maybe. But the point is, It wasn't meant to be a chore. It was supposed to be an ongoing dialogue, a natural part of their existence.
But how do we apply that to our modern lives? It's not like we can expect our kids to drop everything and have deep philosophical conversations about faith while we're driving them to soccer practice.
Of course not. But the principle is still there. It's about finding ways to make faith relevant, to make it meaningful within the context of our own experiences.
So instead of literally binding these words on our hands and between our eyes like the text says, maybe it's about being more mindful. Like, how do our actions reflect our values in everyday life?
Exactly. And that leads to another big question. What are the values you want to pass on? Whether it's about faith, ethics, simply how to be a good person, how can we model those values in a way that the next generation will actually understand and be impacted by?
That's a big question. And it ties in with this idea of obedience leading to a good life, which is another key theme in Deuteronomy 6. Moses promised the Israelites that if they followed God's commands, they would experience life, prosperity, and safety.
Yes, and it's important to be careful how we interpret that, especially in our modern context where prosperity gospel is such a big thing.
Right, so it's not about a guaranteed path to wealth or a problem-free existence.
No, not at all. It's about something much deeper. I think it's about living in alignment with your values, striving for justice, compassion, faithfulness, that kind of life, even if it's not always easy or comfortable. It brings a sense of purpose and peace, a kind of peace that goes beyond just material possessions.
So it's about finding fulfillment in living with integrity, even when things are tough.
Exactly. Even in the midst of hardship, someone who's living according to their values, they might find a strength, a resilience that other people just don't have, a sense of meaning that shines through even the darkest times.
That's a powerful image. So we've talked about loving God with your whole being, passing faith on to future generations, and finding strength through living in alignment with your values. What else can we glean from Deuteronomy 6 that's applicable to our lives today?
Well, the chapter ends with this really interesting focus on memory. It's about actively remembering God's faithfulness, his laws, the stories of their deliverance from Egypt.
You know, it's easy to forget about those things, especially when life is good.
It is.
We get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture.
That's exactly why Moses instructs them to write God's laws on their doorposts. It was a visual cue, a tangible reminder to keep those commands at the forefront of their minds.
So it's not just about internalizing those values, but making them a visible part of your environment.
Right. It's about creating a whole culture of remembrance. But how do we do that today? Most of us aren't going to literally write scriptures on our door frames.
Right. So what's the modern equivalent of writing on the doorposts of our lives? What are those tangible reminders that can help us stay grounded in what really matters?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think it's the perfect segue into our final part, where we'll explore some practical ways to apply these ancient ideas to our modern lives.
Sounds good to me. Stick with us, listeners. We'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into Deuteronomy 6. Welcome back, everyone. So we've been talking about this idea of creating a culture of remembrance, but how do we actually do that in our modern world? Like, we're not going to start carving scriptures into our door frames, are we?
No, probably not. But the underlying principle is still really powerful. Think about it. What are the things that truly matter to you? What values, beliefs, memories do you want to keep at the forefront of your mind?
So it's about figuring out what we want to write on the doorposts of our own lives, right?
Right.
What deserves that kind of constant visual reminder.
Exactly. And it could be anything, really. A picture of your family, a quote that inspires you, maybe a symbol of your faith.
Oh, or even a reminder of a personal goal you're working towards.
Yeah, absolutely. The point is to make those things visible, create those tangible reminders of what's truly important.
It's like having a vision board for your soul.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just personal reminders, too.
Yeah.
Well, think about how we shape our environments, our homes, our workplaces.
Oh, I see what you mean.
What messages are we sending through the things we surround ourselves with?
That's a really good point. It's about being intentional with what we choose to display, the stories we tell, the values we embody. It's all part of creating that culture of remembrance.
Exactly. And I think that's a beautiful way to tie everything together. Deuteronomy 6 is ultimately a call to live a life of intentionality. A life rooted in love for God, commitment to our values, and a deep sense of remembrance.
You know, it's really amazing how this ancient text can still speak to us today. It challenges us to think about how we're living, what we're prioritizing.
And what kind of legacy we're building.
You all said.
Yeah.
And on that note, it's time for us to surface from this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder. What would it mean to write the things that truly matter to you on the doorposts of your life. What do you want to remember, cherish, and pass on to future generations?
Keep exploring those questions.
Yeah.
Keep diving deeper into that rich tapestry of wisdom that surrounds us.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those hearts open.